Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments. Today we are going to discuss about how to study vernacular architecture. So what are the methodological processes one have to follow upon in studying the vernacular architecture, either in the form of a building, in the form of a detail, in the form of a layout. So what I will be doing is I will be going through a review of some of the literature work from Brunskill's illustrated handbook on vernacular architecture work, and what kind of methodology he have established in the extensive recording and as well as the kind of intensive service. And later on I try to elaborate on the work which we did from School of Planning and Architecture Bhopal as well as the Indian Institute of Technology Roorkee. So how we encouraged our students to study the traditional architecture elements before in their early semesters of architecture course. So when we talk about how to study vernacular architecture, as we discussed in all our previous lectures, the scale of this culturally responsive built environment, it ranges from a small room to a size of a continent, because the culture, it can have its implication and its influence representation from a small room to a scale of a continent. So that is where the representation and follows in different scales and how they actually come together. So when we are studying about this vernacular architecture, we have to be precisely know what exactly are we looking for. In fact, let's say someone is saying I am looking at longhouses in Dartmoor region. Obviously the scale is fixed, the region scale is fixed, and the type of house is fixed, and if you are putting a time of the house, again the construction time or it is a so that is also fixed. And let's say if someone is looking at, if you are looking at the vernacular houses in subarctic climates, right? Obviously when you talk about the subarctic climates, it goes from almost from Canada to Sweden, Norway, Russia. So the whole stretch of geography ranges. But then when we take the sample of it, obviously a few from Canada, a few from Kiruna or in the Swedish part, few from Norwegian part, few from Finland part, few from Russia. So the geography goes within that subarctic belt. So what exactly we are looking at? Are we looking at houses in the cold climatic zones, especially in the subarctic or arctic climates? Then our sampling will vary. We cannot just come to a very good conclusion only by taking a Sweden example. We cannot conclude for the whole subarctic. Obviously the sampling has to go around. And a student of mine, Nipun Prabhakar, while he was working in Nepal with some projects on Hunarshalla, he has a passion of photography. So he was documenting on the whole doors of Nepal. So which means his focus was clear that he is looking at the vernacular doors, only the door element. So which means throughout the Nepal, how the doors are able to communicate to the society, what is the role of the doors and how different trends are there in the traditional doors and how it is segregating the spaces, both from an urban scenario and the rural scenario, and how it is corresponding to the streetscape and basically the whole semiotic process. So now his focus has lied more on to the element of door. And similarly, a person working on the roofing material, someone working in the roofing material, let's say in the whole southwest of England, then it talks about much more bigger region, and it talks about what kind of material it goes, what kind of techniques it goes, what kind of logistics it goes into the transportation of the material from the quarries to the sites, and how economical it is. So obviously the focus was very different. So it is very much fact, this particular slide is very much fact for any researcher to think about, because first and the foremost thing is we should identify what we are looking for. Then when we talk about a spatial scale, as I said, there is a space-time framework which was actually defined by Ian Bentley's work. What he talks about is kind of how different layers of the built environment, how they are compromising a set of change aspects, and that which goes in time. For example, you have the underlying topography which changes in a geological time. You have the flora and fauna, the natural systems which changes in an ecological time. Today, if you take the case of Uttarakhand, many rivers or many flows have dried because of some various projects. The channels of the river channels have been diverted, and obviously the settlement pattern has been differentiated. So obviously the existence of flora and fauna, the river system, the ecosystems actually have been the root cause of the survival of these traditional settlements. So which is a natural system which changes in an ecological time. Above it, we have the public linkage system, which is a network of services, the road networks, the connections. So that is which might change in a millennium. Later on, above that, where we come to the blocks and plots, which might change to the ownerships and to the integration and disintegration of various plot ownerships and demarcations. Obviously they might change in a century's time. Above it, that is where mostly architecture is focusing on the building, the decades, which might change in decades, maybe 2-3 decades, one generation. Obviously how they change with new material inventions and the degradation of the old materials, and obviously the much more components which could be the intermediate components which might change now and then. So obviously what we are looking at is a kind of space-time framework, and just remember the existence of flora fauna is very much equally important of how a building existed in that particular site or not. Imagine a volcanic site and how it has made the further settlements to undergo a tremendous change. If there is a floody site, obviously it has an impact on the nature of the settlement nearby. So obviously this ecosystem. So what, as an architect, most of the students or most of the, they only concentrate on the above three, and maybe the urban designers, or they concentrate this. But much of the time we normally kind of ignore this part of it. But it is very much related to the existence of the vernacular settlements. So before documenting about any, it's a building or a neighborhood or anything, one need to have a thorough idea, at least an idea of which location it is. So from there you can actually analyze the logistics of material transportations and the skilled labor availability, so that all matters. We are talking about the domestication of these materials. You need to know where these sources are coming from. So that is where we are talking about when we talk about the focus, what actual geographic area or a scale you are looking. Are you looking at door or a window element? Are you looking at a building typology? Are you looking at a group of buildings as a neighborhood? Are you looking at a particular a type of buildings where a particular clan is occupying, right? A particular tribe is occupying a certain, so are you looking at these nature of tribes all over the country or in that region? So you need to understand that very carefully. And what is your outset of your geographical area, which is your study area, right? For instance, in any of the vernacular architecture, it's not like a kind of donkey work. You go and measure the work and you document it. One need to apprehend so many questions in their mind. In fact, I'll explain my own journey, how my journey has started when I was a student of architecture back late 90s and early 2000s, when I was going through Latur, when I've seen some abandoned houses, the first question which came in my mind was, why these houses with a good amount of technological innovations and a concrete technology, why these are abandoned by the locals? The very first question have given me the whole direction into the vernacular architecture, the study of vernacular architecture. So one need to apprehend some questions, why this is like this, why they are making timber, why they are, though timber is available in Uttarakhand, why people are unable to use timber today as a building material, why they are used to brick and concrete structures. And now a good example, this image of mine when I was studying in Tamil Nadu, in Tarangambadi. This development, so these are all development in the bottom one is basically given by the NGO. SIFs have provided this, and the curiosity in this photograph is the language is so different, the vertical language is so different. This is what they have been given and this is what they have been made, right? They have been developed. So fortunately, two brothers got this house, and then gradually they developed this house with the local materials, and they tried to make one roof. They would have done a small roof individually. That language would have been different. But why a big roof combining two things? Because unnecessarily material. So then I come back, there's the two brothers got by lottery method or whatever the method they have got, they're adjacent to each other. So which means even the process is linking to the architectural outcome and representation. So another photograph which I can say, anyone who looked at the photograph, they only see it's a puja. Why this worship toilet was converted as a worship place? So these are very basic fundamental questions. So then it goes back to many answers, it goes back to the cultural norms, it goes back to the financial feasibilities, it goes back to the availability of skill, craftsmanship. So there are many issues within it. And sometimes it goes to the permanency and the tenure aspects of it. Till now we talked about what we are looking for, what is the geographical context and the scale of the study. And now we have to see what time of this building or a place, because one need to have a fix of a time. Let's say if you are looking at kind of barn houses in the early 19th century, so obviously you need to fix a time frame from when to when. Or if you are talking about any colonial buildings, especially in the smaller towns, then you have to talk about, is it post-independent or until independence? So if you look at Tania Sen Gupta's work from UCL Bartlett, from Westminster and UCL Bartlett, so you can see that you've studied till the independence time how the buildings have been negotiated. So obviously there's a time which is a static condition, and then you are observing within the building within the time frame. So that itself is producing a database within the time frame. So which could be add-on to a kind of art historian database, or it could be used in the conservation processes, So that is the data which you are building upon. Because the moment you are mixing so many times, even within a building, sometimes, let's say 2-3 generations have modified it. Obviously, in one building you can see different timings, but still that is again talking about a particular stretch of a time. Like we talked about the transformation of a traditional Thai house, starting from Rayon Thai, the post 13th century onwards, you can see how it is well documented based on the various ongoing challenges and changes. And in the 2009, so it has been divided stage by stage, and what are the major influences into it and how it has been negotiated and how the functionality has been determined. So Brunskill, what he talks about is, he talks about mainly 2 to 3 important methods, and this is one very detailed way of, I'm just giving you some kind of very brief points, but one should take it into a detailed account of it. One is the extensive recording. First of all, we need to define the survey area. So this is the survey area we are looking at. In India, we call it Kasra map. So we need to, this is the scale of our area. And then the second aspect is, for any of this study, first assemble the materials. Materials in sense, you need the tape, you need the pencils, you need the papers, you need the plane tables. Sometimes for doing any survey, the plane table equipment has to be there. You need when we are measuring the contours of it, or when we are measuring any kind of, now in the modern times we have the laser equipments to measure the survey. So obviously we need all these materials. Then decide on the relevant period of building. Are we talking about from starting to, if you are talking about the old 12th century houses, then we have a length of period. Are we talking about a phase of a building time or a style of a building time? So we need to decide on that relevant period of the building. Decide on size and type. So what size and what typology of it. Then identify the building, because one need to locate the building, because especially in many of the vernacular buildings you don't get appropriate location. So obviously based on the survey aspects, so you need to identify the north aspect of it, we need to add the proximity aspect of it, and the reference point to it, So one, we have to give a reference kind of thing, so that's why one can identify the building and note down the aspect. So what are the what are the reference aspects to it? How it is by architecturally, what are the architectural aspects into it? Then note down the principal walling material. So is it a rubble stone masonry, or is it a dry stone masonry, or is it a rammed earth walls? So we need to talk about the walling material. Note down any reliable detailed feature. Are you talking about any particular built feature? Are you talking about a dormer window? Are you talking about a lintel, right? So not only that, reliable detailed feature, which we are talking about, not only about the lintel, but some age, some date might have been written on the lintel. So obviously it was written on lintel, let's say 1857. So it is talking about the age of the building, right? So that reliable information has to be captured. And the salient features according to the code. So we have to document about all these architectural features. What are these special features in it? Add a photograph and diagrammatic sketches, and note down initials and date of survey, because it is going to be a documentary record. Someone who is going to refer day after tomorrow, after a few days or a few years, it obviously adds to that particular date of reference. So what you need to do is, you need to have a kind of coding sort of thing. So you have, what you can see here is A, B, C, D, E, F. So you have E windows and walling and the technique, weathering technique, roof shape, materials. Here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you have the stone, brick, flint, cobble, like that. So there are a variety of options which we have a coded sheet, right? So once if you have this kind of template with you, and then similarly we have for window frames, doorways, sections, plans, and the links, the chimneys and all other things. So you have this variety of typology. So once you have the kind of, it's a kind of stencil sort of thing, you are getting a template of what all options could be possible within it. And this could be even developed by initially studying some few examples, and then you make a template of it. And then what you do is you can develop a small record card, which could be a very 8.5 inches by 12 inches or some small card. And then what you can see here is the location and the county, which is the Cumberland, and the address, Lowmoor House, and the map reference, which is with a code. And it's like that you have the surveyor and the date, like that you have. And here if you see the same template, so now there are a few ticks here, so which talks about the coded description shows the house to have a brick walling, which is A2, with a mixture of other materials, which is B2, a gable roof, which is C3, and a thick slate. So, and then to have tall windows, and then we have vertically sliding sashes, and we have a doorway with a Renaissance type surround, and the 2-story H4, and we have 2-unit and cross passage plan, and to have a barn attached. So basically this is talking about the overall profile of this house. So this is one way of, because once you have a template, so then if you are talking about documenting a series of houses in that locality, obviously this kind of template will be definitely useful. But then it will not talk about much more in the details of the windows, details of the spaces and things. That is where the next step comes with the intense survey. Intensive survey, it has 2 components. One is the measuring, and the second one is the drafting. So you are collecting the meat in the first level, and the second one is you are polishing the meat. So in the first level, you need, number 1, the personnel. So 2 to 3 people at least, one who will hold on your tape and who will assist you in the surveying process, right? 2 to 3, and one will be noting down all the recordings in an accurate way. The second, you need all kinds of equipments, a drawing board, plane tables, or any kind of laser equipment. In the modern times we have the laser equipments, and nowadays much more advanced in a kind of the digital equipments have come. Even they can study based on the match available, and they can even talk about the time of it. Various technological equipments are there. So depends on nature of the field work which you are doing, and depends on the target of the outcome. We need to think about the equipment, right? Like for instance, now we are purchasing a 3D scanner of it. So obviously things have become much more easy, but you see the kind of input which we have to give is a time-taking process. Once the input is ready, then it can develop its own. So the procedure, the prepare sketch plans and sections and elevations, right? So first initially we develop small plans and sections with all the dimensions in it. And then, because when we are doing, and we are normally developing in notes, but when we come back, we have to develop the larger scale details in plan, section, elevation, and as a key with cross-referencing. Because in a small notes, we do a smaller part. Sometimes we fix it. We put the tape, and we might do panoramic kind of understanding of these measurements. But then when we come back, we need to actually, at least before leaving the site, we need to develop that kind of large scale details. Locate the building by triangulation from some baseline, example the front fence. Sometimes, this is very important aspect when architect Benny Kuriakose was actually doing the habitat mapping exercise in Tarangambadi and Chinangudi, where the disaster have completely washed away all the houses. So there was no reference point to getting the actual. So then they tried to identify some small boundaries of these stones which were still evident, or sometimes the road width, sometimes a lamppost or something. So these are the reference points, where one can actually draw the plan, and then they can even cross-check with the diagonal variations and things like that. Proceed from room to room, take plan dimensions including diagonals and rough openings, example window, jamb to jamb, ignoring window frames. So we need to go, it's not like one room you do here, one room somewhere here, then it's very difficult for you to mix together, because you need to go step by step process. You start with one end and you go to the other end, and in that way you can actually cross-check diagonally also, and you can cross-check overall lengthwise also. So in that way things, sometimes there will be a little human errors, 5, 6 mm, 10 mm will be difference, but still it will give you some accuracy. Take sectional dimensions using staircases to give overall heights, floor to ceiling heights for separate rooms, roof space for accessible roof construction, and angle of roof slope. So even the staircases will help you just by looking at the number of staircase and just measuring one riser you can always get, and at the same time floor to floor, floor to roof, what are the details we are getting. And take dimensions of each elevation in turn. They should be related to horizontal datum line, example top of plinth, not the varying ground line. So in fact you have, because the ground line keeps varying, so that's where you have to take the consideration of the plinth level and then give a kind of reference to it. Take dimensions of selected details. So if it is the windows, if the sills, if there is any ornamented aspects into it, so take dimensions of those. Then take photographs of elevations and details, and composite photograph may be used on a cramped site. So now the fourth aspect is taking and noting dimensions, assembling the survey notes. So this assembling the survey, see, parallelly I would like to show what our students exercises we did. Like we took them to Chanderi, the rural part of Chanderi, where the whole construction is full of only the stone. And what we did was we divided into big groups, and each group have taken up one village, one small village, and each group have actually measured the drawings, and then within each group we have divided into subgroups, 2-3 people, and then each person has to document a few houses there. So that is where they did and with that what happens is, especially while documenting in a cultural setting, is one will have to interact with the people, because the villagers may not allow you, they may not trust you. So you need to have develop a comfortable trust, and then only they will allow you to measure their houses. In many cases they have allowed, but very few cases which they are a little rigid not to allow inside, especially some of the conservative families. So that kind of trust has to develop, and people used to measure all the details. And then this is where the drawing part of it. Number one, the personal aspect is always important, because the moment you finish your field work, you can't wait for 1 month or 2 months and then you draw later, because you will forget things, because that is a gift what God has given. You can easily forget things. The better thing is, if you finish it off, at least a rough diagram has to be made. Then immediately once you come to the lodge or a hotel or anywhere, you have to frame with your fresh memory. And the second thing is, whatever you are drawing, see, sometimes it is a shared work. One person makes a measurement, but someone else have to draft it. Make sure your drawing is clear so that the other person can easily understand your drawing and able to develop it. And then equipment. For drawing, again, you need, of course, in the modern times, people hardly use a drawing board, but now we need to use of the drawing boards and the T-squares and the erasers. So make sure when you are developing this kind of, you take some precautionary measures into it. Procedure. So is it a random sketch we are making? Because we need to define the scale, a legible scale. So normally, which is appropriate to the subject. Are we talking about a site plan of a village? Then it has to go maybe 500 or 1000 also. It depends on the scale of the village and how it can fit in the sheet, drawing sheet, if it's a A0 or A1. So, and the second aspect of fixing the scale is how we can reproduce it. When you are drawing a plan of this scale, then how we can draw elevations into it, and how we can make a views into it. That all comes how we can reproduce it. So site plans, normally they are prefer to have 1:100, but elevations, because being of aesthetic nature, we develop in 1:50. And the details, sometimes the nature depends on the nature, 1:25 or 1:10. That's normal which we ask our students to do. Set out the various sheets using overall dimensions as a guide. And it is customary to arrange a site plan with north. See the indication of north at the top, and the floor plans with the main entrance facing the bottom of the sheet and the main elevation above the ground floor. So these are some of the modalities how we present the drawings. Set out in pencil each part of the drawing using the compasses to establish triangulation. Running dimensions will be helpful in using the scale, because we can actually see how it goes. If several parts of the drawings are worked up simultaneously, mistakes can be found and corrected without too much. Because when we are clubbing different patches of work, then obviously we have to be able to see that how our dimensions are going wrong, how they are not matching. And once we have, the first thing is the pencil part of it, and then it has to be inked. When we are doing the inking, we have to do with various thicknesses. When we are using rotoring, for basically when we cut the plan, obviously you have to see that wherever the section of the wall is cutted down, that should be thicker, and then the windows, the lesser important thickness, and then if you see that the floor patterns or anything, that is much more least. So the depth you are going, the least important highlighting part of it. So then lettering should be added. Obviously we have to detail out what is what. Sometimes use a local language into it, that is much more useful for the local persons. Finally, each sheet should be given a title, date, north points should be provided for the plans, and written and drawn scales in both imperial and metric measures. So some of the draftsmanship. So because why we are doing the drafting? Because it has to communicate the information. It has to communicate the levels, it has to communicate the technicality of it, it has to communicate the volumes into it, everything. Similarly, records the fact, fact and the items of interpretation should be separated. For instance, ideally one set of drawings should be hatched to indicate assumed periods of construction, but the two sets are often combined. So some of the examples from Brunskill's work is like you see the ground floor plan, how it is diagonally checked, right, and what are the various south elevations and what is the datum line is taken into consideration, right. So the sections, and every section should have heights of it. Now what we did was some of our experiences. So even though we do from morning to evening the collection of data, but then we bring them to the hotels or find an open space, and then there itself we asked all the people to form into the groups, and then they basically put up their work and compile it in a fare it up. They basically have to fare it up in the site itself, because if there is anything missing, the next day they are going to the site, they should be able to get that information. That is very much needed. And then we took about 1 month time from the start of the fieldwork to the end of the publishing. I'm talking about students of 35 people in a section like that, in 2 sections about. So producing about 200 sheets of documentation of 3 villages. So a good example is, so what we do is, first of all, we have to manage a proper work management system, because it has to run like a factory kind of thing, because time is also an important part in an academic system. So we need to identify. So some people say, the students say, sir, I am good in sketching, I am good in painting. Yes, we do use your skills, but still, when do you learn the other skills? Because you are in a system of academic system where you are entitled to train, get trained with these particular skills. So we need to give this opportunity for the other students who are lacking the drafting skills, who are lacking the painting skills, to give an opportunity so that they train themselves and they build confidence with it. So like that, you can see students first they inked it up, and then they also grouped up various based on the caste, based on the occupations, how they grouped it up. So why they are grouping up? Even if you want to study a detailed building, so they can take a sample from here, take a sample from here, take a sample from here. So in that way, if you are taking a sample by material, yes, you have a criteria of why you are selecting that sample. Sample by caste orientation, then you are talking about the functionality of spaces, why you are taking that sample. So similarly, what we did was, whatever the documentation they have done, we translated. My team back in Bhopal while I was working there, so they translated, and students were the authors, the co-authors of this particular chapters, and vernacular settlements in Chindi, they translated in the monograph. And then after that, another studio, again this is a village. So if you look at it in the site itself, in the restaurant, we made all the drawings mostly ready. So once we come back to the classes, then we organized the whole layout. This is the Kyonchi, the whole setting of it. But to do this, we need a reference of, and even the GIS system and the geographical information systems also had helped us in locating the maps. And then what we did was, instead of burdening the students with the whole idea, but what we did was to make a much more thorough study, two people to document one complete house and its transformation. So like that, the person who was working on this pattal, the leaves, the plates which we make with leaves, so his house was documented and how it is constructed and how they survive. So the whole story, the narratives has been documented. And similarly, a model has been built out with a combined process. So in that way, this is how we developed. But then the third development as a teacher, what I did was, I thought, yes, in every stage, they're just drafting, but I'm finding that there was a love missing. There's a kind of feeling that emotion is not coming within that. So what I thought was, I asked them to paint it, do a small nice painting. So each member of the group, they started painting what the house they are documenting. So with that, what happened was, they started observing the details. They started observing the scale. They started observing the movements for a long time. And look at the scale of it. So this is a kind of hand-drawn. They understood the scale, they studied the movements, they studied the details of it, proportions. And this was a temple in a house. In a dwelling, there was a temple, which we never noticed being in Roorkee. So then he started talking about the lifestyle of it. So he spent a lot of time in observing that. Then how these traditional houses, how they are. So it took a long time for them, maybe 3-4 days only to do a painting, because the rough pencil work, then painting work, the trial and error process, observation, some go back, sometime missing a detail, go back and observe it and come back. And then similarly, these are all some of the intricate, the courtyard, how a courtyard functions. So what happens is, this method has approached. First, one thing is, the moment your painting is ready, first you fell in love with it. Because then you own it, then your documentation will be much more faster. That is what, at the end of the bottom line of the how to study vernacular architecture is, first thing is you have to learn to unlearn. What we imagine as an architect's training, and a regular architecture training, if you want to learn vernacular architecture, you need to unlearn certain things, because the window size will be very small, the platform is very small, the human scale is very different. The material scale is very different. So you need to unlearn a few things and see how the community starts living. So thank you very much.